Hello, everybody. We're excited to have you back again today. I'm really excited about my guest today. Thank you, Travis, for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so Travis is a friend of mine. He works at Pearson Butler law firm, and he focuses on estate planning, but he also does a lot with like business law and business formations and stuff. So I thought he would be such a great person to talk to today, to give us some tips and insights for, especially for new business owners. But there's so much that goes into starting up a business and stuff. And from a legal perspective, I would love to just kind of pick your brain and maybe like the top 3 things that you think small business owners should know as they begin their new business. So I'm going to turn it over to you and we can just chat about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Britta, thanks for having me. And who better to speak with than a bookkeeper for, various small businesses. You've probably seen a little bit of everything.
Yeah, well, I feel like it could be super beneficial, right? Like I know how it was when I started my business.
Yeah.
There's so many like different nuances with each different type of business. And I know it's kind of hard to like be very general about things. So I know keep it pretty high level, but yeah, there's so much that goes into starting a new business. I would love to kind of know what you think.
Yeah, there definitely is. And entrepreneurs, they're the people with the ideas, they're the movers, they're the shakers, but oftentimes they just don't have the background and understanding of forming a new business, what it takes, thinking through all the various permutations of the business itself, setting up the business, and then eventually, ultimately selling the business. And so I kind of want to talk about a cradle to grave approach a little bit today for the small business owner. First, you've got this brilliant idea. You want to create a business around it. What do you do? And the first thing you do, and this is probably intuitive for most people, is you come up with a name. And the name of your business is really important because it's so focused on the branding and the identity, and ultimately is going to be the reference point for your business. And so a lot of thought needs to go into it. However, there are some legal ramifications for selecting a name. And the first is ensuring that the name you've chosen is going to be available with the Utah Division of Corporations. And so first thing you're going to want to do is go on the Utah Division of Corporations website, do an entity search, type in the name, and they will provide feedback regarding whether the name you've selected is available for your business. And then if it is, you can reserve the name while you're forming the business for up to 90 days. So you'll reserve your name, and then you'll do what's necessary to form the business. And when I say form the business, this kind of moves into my second area of focus when it comes to legal considerations for the small business owner. You're probably familiar with various business types, various corporate and business entities. This may be the most important thing you do as an entrepreneur forming a new business, is deciding which business entity is right for you.
I'm so glad you're going into this because I feel like as people come to me, that's like one of the biggest questions I get. Should I be an LLC? Should I be an SCorp? Should I be how do I set my business up, and what's the most important?
Right. And there are various considerations. And one of the primary considerations when choosing a business entity is having a good understanding of where your funding is going to come from. If you're a bootstrap entity that's going where all the capitalization is going to be from your savings and from your assets, then you have a little more flexibility regarding the type of entity. However, if you're going to be reliant on venture capital or on angel investors, you're a little more limited because most venture capital firms and most angel investors will require that the business be structured as a corporation, what's referred to by the IRS as a C-Corp. I'm going to step back a little bit and just provide a summary of the business entities available to small business owners. The ones that people are most likely operating as, at least initially, are sole proprietorships and partnerships. And those are business entities where you haven't necessarily formally filed documentation with the state. You're operating in a de facto way. You don't necessarily have, some sort of formal organizational documents, but you're operating your business. You're doing the things necessary to be able to make money.
So does that mean like the sole proprietor, have they filed with the state to get name and stuff like that? You can still be a sole proprietor and have filed with the state to get a name, or is this a separate thing as well?
Yeah, so you can still reserve a name as a sole proprietorship or as a partnership.
Okay.
And however, you don't necessarily have to formally organize the entity by filing either a certificate of formation, articles of incorporation, articles of formation, depending on the jurisdiction where you're forming the company.
I see.
And the primary difference between a sole proprietorship and a partnership and a corporation, and then the other entities that I'm going to mention, including a limited liability company and a limited partnership, is liability protection that's afforded to a corporation and limited liability company that may not necessarily be available to a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And that's one of the primary benefits of, say, when you're forming a small business, you form it as a limited liability company, and then you get the liability protection that's provided to all limited liability companies pursuant to state law.
Gotcha.
And the same is true with corporations. However, that limited liability protection means that any creditor or any liability that's incurred by the entity or the individuals, and when operating as an agent for the entity, is limited to the capitalization and assets of the company. They can't go after your personal assets that aren't part of the company.
So that's one of the major advantages, is to set those up, right? Is to protect your personal assets.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and you don't get the same protection with the partnership or a sole proprietorship. So if you're operating as a partnership or a sole proprietorship and you incur some sort of liability, you're in a high risk field, or there's just some accident that happens and you become personally liable, or the company becomes liable, your personal assets are at risk.
Oh, I did not realize that. And that's good to know.
Yeah, and so that's why it becomes really important to consider your potential liability as a business operator. Determine how your personal assets are held and what the assets of the company are, and then organize the company in a way that provides the greatest liability protection. And if you want liability protection, you're generally going to choose between the two separate entities. The vast majority of companies, you're going to want that liability protection, and so you're going to want to either set up a limited liability company or a corporation. And a corporation, there are benefits and drawbacks to both. I mentioned the funding aspect. If you're expecting to raise venture capital, you're probably likely going to want to form your business as what's called a SCorp. One of the primary drawbacks of forming a corporation over a limited liability company is the taxation. The earnings of a C corporation are taxed at two levels: first at the corporate level and then the shareholder level. Whereas a limited liability company is taxed just like a partnership would be, meaning it's taxed at the ownership level only once, as those proceeds are drawn out of the company to the members of the limited liability company. However, there are two types of corporations. There's what's referred to by the IRS as a C Corp, which is the traditional corporation you think of when you think of the term corporation. But there's also an entity called an SCorp, which is also structured like a corporation is, meaning you form it by filing articles of incorporation. It's governed by bylaws. There's a board of directors, and there are officers of the company who manage the day-to-day aspects of running the company. However, an SCorp, unlike a C Corp, is not taxed at the corporate level. It is only taxed at the shareholder level. And so when earnings are drawn out by the shareholders, that's when the taxation occurs on the earnings of the company. And so that there's not the double taxation penalty for an SCorp.
So what's the advantage of filing as an SCorp then? I mean, versus an LLC? I know from what I've understood is that you want to get to a certain level of income or a certain number of employees before you want to file as an SCorp. What's your recommendation on that?
Yeah, and so a limited liability company becomes much simpler when it comes to both the formation and operation of the company, because there aren't as many administrative and regulatory hurdles. And so if, the vast majority of new businesses, I typically suggest when looking at it that they organize as a limited liability company rather than as an S-corp because of some of the administrative hurdles associated with being an S-corp. One of the primary differences is there are pretty strict restrictions on who can be a shareholder in an S-corp. It's got to be an individual. They've got to be a citizen. It can't be a corporate entity, and it can't be most types of trusts. Whereas a limited liability company, you don't necessarily have that restriction on membership. And so as you're growing as a company, and this is where my estate planning background kind of comes in. A lot of people will end up owning their membership interest or their ownership interest in their company in their revocable living trust. If you're formed as an S-corp, it becomes a little more complicated to ensure that the trust qualifies as an S-corp shareholder. And so it might be just a little bit beyond the conversation that we're having today, but an S-corp requires just a little more of that administrative work, when determining both membership and the operation of the company.
So glad we have people like you, because that is just so much information. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's so, like you said, there's just so many different scenarios at play and stuff. And it sounds like your background in business and the trusts, estate planning is really beneficial on both sides of the equation. So you're a great person to have here talking to us. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's true. You're absolutely right that a lot of my clients will come in the door for estate planning. And I'll end up doing some general business counsel for them too, because we'll go over their asset portfolio, their business owners. They have various companies and they hadn't really necessarily given some of these issues a lot of thought, but you also have to kind of incorporate their businesses into their estate plan. And vice versa, I'll have business clients come in the door, with various businesses, whether it's a transaction, they're buying a business in an asset purchase, or they're selling a business. We try to figure out either how to hold the business, how to transfer interest in the business, and how that kind of functions with their estate plan.
Yeah, that's absolutely like the back and forth. So much going on, so many different roles at play. Well,
yeah,
totally appreciate you taking the time to do this. I feel like it's so much information. I don't want to overwhelm everybody because right now my mind is just spinning with everything that's going on. But I would love to have you on again and talk some more aspects of this if you're willing to do this another time.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This has been awesome. A lot of fun.
So cool. And if people have any questions, are you available if they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. They can either send me an email. Email is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And my email address is travis@pearsonbutler.com.
Perfect.
Or they
and I'll list that as well in the notes for this too.
Awesome. So. Yeah, I appreciate it. People can also just call my direct line. My office phone is 801-438-4808.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Travis. Thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're super busy and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Britta. It's a lot of fun.
Have a great day, everybody.
Great.